Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Scalfaro, and I teach philosophy and musical aesthetics and history of music in the media at the Department of the Arts, University of Bologna. The title of my paper is Leonard Bernstein and Complex Music Education. The 53 episodes of Young People Concerts were broadcast by the Columbia Broadcasting System between 1958 and 1972. Each episode corresponded to the filming of a live performance by the New York Philharmonic, with Bernstein introducing, illustrating, and conducting the musical pieces. First at Carnegie Hall until 1962, then in the concert hall at Lincoln Center. The audience in the hall consisted mainly of children and teenagers. Bernstein, with his production team, put a lot of effort into these TV concerts. He selected the topics and the pieces of music and wrote the scripts. The construction of a clear and captivating music discourse, the care of the single word were essential aspects for him. I would like to focus on two of Bernstein's teaching strategies: the segmentation selection of the proposed musical pieces and the verbalization of music. To do this, I borrowed the definitions of segmentation selection and verbalization developed by the scholar Giuseppina author of a modern theorization of the didactics of listening. Segmentation selection. The didactics of listening should lead students to grasp the unfolding of an entire musical piece, construct a map for themselves by means of mental processes such as being able to analyze, relate, grasp analogies and differences. The teacher must be able to segment the piece in a way that conforms to both the constructive principles followed by the composer and the laws of perception. In addition, the teacher must be able to select parts of the piece that lend themselves to partial listening, but are significant, capable of representing the whole. Verbalization. Listening didactics must develop an adequate verbalization of the music heard. However, one must learn to describe the piece of music with critical distance, in an objective manner. There is the obstacle of specific technical vocabulary, that it can be circumvented. Technical terms can be converted into concepts, adjectives, referring to areas other than music, such as rhetorical, literary, psychological, scientific, etc. The vocabulary to be employed, technical and connotative together, can refer to musical terms, to qualities of sensory and affective experience. It will be a language that narrates music. Laface recommends talking examples from the great models. I believe Bernstein can be one of them. In his concert lectures, Bernstein pays great attention to the development of a discourse that proceeds from the simple to the complex by means of musical examples. In the episode entitled What is Sonata Form, broadcast November 6, 1964, to illustrate the ABA tripartite form, Bernstein starts with the nursery rhyme Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, moves onto the Beatles song And I Love Her, and finally to the more sophisticated Michaela's aria from Carmen of Bizet. Bernstein almost always begins his lectures with a question. He then presents a listen to the entire musical piece, then segments and selects the parts that serve to clarify the discourse, and afterwards he plays the entire piece again in the hope that the listeners will hear it with new, more aware ears. As an example of segmentation and selection, I offer an expert from the episode What is Melody? Bernstein, in order to explain that counterpoint is full of intertwining melodies, chooses an expert from the prelude to Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, breaks it down into its individual instrumental parts, and plays it back later as a whole. One moment. Yes.
And on it goes, one long, passionate melody for almost 10 minutes. And that sure is a lot of melody for a composer who's supposed to be unmelodic. But you see, his melody grew out of little scraps, those motives we heard at the beginning. And that's where people make the mistake of thinking there's no melody in Wagner. Of course, what makes it even more difficult for people to recognize the melody is that frightening word counterpoint, which means, as you know, more than one melody going on at the same time. That really gets in people's way. But it shouldn't, because, after all, the more melody, the better. And counterpoint can be terribly exciting. For example, in this same Tristan prelude, much later on, Wagner builds a hair-raising climax by using counterpoint in this way. The strings are pouring out their melody, climbing higher and higher, like this. While that frenzy is going on, the horns and cellos down lower are screaming out the first four-note motive we heard, over and over, like this. And that's not all. At the same time, the trumpet joins in with all his force, right in the middle, between the other two melodies, singing the second four-note motive, again and again, like this. Now, do you think all that's too much melody for a human ear to catch all at once? Well, just listen to it all together, and I'll bet you hear it all, every note. Boy, what a climax that is. One of the most thrilling ever composed. And yet, it's counterpoint, that frightening word.
Voilà. Regarding verbalization, Bernstein believes that music should not be given meanings that do not belong to it. It is necessary to develop an appropriate narrative of the musical course through similes and metaphors. For example, Bernstein points out how the tripartite and symmetrical structure of the sonata form can be found in nature. The three consist of a central trunk and side branches, or in the human body, our face as a central axis, nose and mouth, and two identical side elements, eyes and ears, or musical notes that aggregate to form intervals and then melodies are like atoms that aggregate to form molecules and non-living beings. I offer a second example on the sonata form, which also shows the development from simple to complex I was talking about earlier. Voilà.
It's perfect three-part balance. Remember that. And second, the excitement of its contrasting elements. Balance and contrast. In those two words, we have the main secrets of sonata form. Now, first, let's consider that three-part design I talked about. This is something we can see all around us. If you think of a bridge with two great towers rising on either side of a river and the connecting span sweeping over the water between them, that's a three-part form. 1, 2, 3. Or think of an elm tree with its central trunk and the umbrella-shaped branches arching out on both sides. That's another three-part structure. 1, 2, 3. Or the three-part balance of a human face with its centerpiece of nose and mouth and its two mirror-like side pieces of eyes and ears. Again, three-part form. 1, 2, 3. Now, of course, any form as basic and natural as that in life must be just as natural in music, and so it is. The most basic form of a simple song is usually a three-part form. Take the old nursery tune that we all know as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, for instance. There's a first part, which we'll call A. That's A. Then comes a middle part, which we'll call B. And finally, we return to the first part, A, again. And the song is over. Now, that's a clear, exact three-part form, A, B, A. Now let's see how this simple little construction grows in size when it's used in a slightly larger song form, say a modern popular song. In fact, most pop tunes stick to this ABA pattern very strictly. The only difference here, and this is important as you'll see later, is that usually the first A section is repeated right away before the B section comes, so that the pattern is really AABA instead of just ABA. But it's still made out of those same three parts, ABA, only the first part is played twice in a row. That's not hard. Let's take a pop tune. In fact, let's take a typical Beatles tune and see what happens. Here first, there's an A section. I give her all my love, that's all I do. And if you saw my love, you'd love her too. I love her. That's A, all right? That's what's... Now what happens? That A section is repeated exactly the same. She gives me everything, and tenderly, and so on, right down to, and I love her. That's the end of the repeated A section, right? Right. Now comes the contrasting B section. A love like ours could never die. I think that's how it goes. As long as I have you near me. That's the B. And that brings us back again to the original A section in all its glory. Bright are the stars that shine, dark is the night, and so on, right to the end of the piece. Well, that represents a small step forward from Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It's small, but it's a step, because it's grown in size, and it has that extra deluxe feature, the repeat of the first A section, which Twinkle, Twinkle does not have. Now, let's follow the growth of a three-part song even farther, as it expands into a big operatic aria. For example, the famous aria from Carmen that is sung by the other woman of the opera, Micaela. This is a little more sophisticated, let's say. It doesn't break up quite so neatly into an exact ABA, but I'm sure you'll be able to follow its three parts just as easily as the Beatles song. There's a sweet lyrical first part, and a more excited dramatic middle part, and then the return again to the quiet first part. And here
Okay. Bernstein was a great enthusiastic communicator. He loved what he did, and you can hear and see that. Bernstein shows that he has the utmost faith in the power of words and especially music, as well as in the ability of his young audience to understand. It is also evident that listening is not understood here in a passive way. The focus on listening education is already present in modern teaching practices related to pedagogical activism. Think of Emile Jacques Dalcroze and Edgar Willems. Apart from being a passive activity, listening more helps learners work on the hierarchy of elements and their continuity, on those aspects that make each piece a whole. Through listening to music and its interpretation, flexible, intuitive, creative thinking can be developed. In his lecture concerts, Bernstein tries to engage the audience, but certainly not enough. They are one-way lectures, also given the TV format. There is a lack of concrete feedback from the students. The videos of his lectures, however, could be usefully employed in the classroom today. Usually, music teachers in schools use audio recordings. However, before the advent of playback devices, to listen to music, one had to go to a performance and the musicians were listened to and watched. With the wide availability of video that we have today, the teacher can restore the combination of listening and watching. Several researchers have demonstrated the usefulness of music videos in a classroom. Back in the 1990s, Geringer, Cassidy, and Bayo conducted an experiment in a school based on the first and fourth movements of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. They divided the students into four groups. The first will listen to two audio versions. The third watched the fantasy cartoon, and the fourth a Bernstein concert lecture. At the end, the four groups were tested. Those who had seen Bernstein's concert lectures scored the highest. Not only were they able to describe the music effectively and relevantly, they were also more emotionally involved than the others. In-class videos correspond to guided listening views. They should be preceded by questions in order to verify the results at the end. What does complexity theory have to do with this? In Une tête bien faite, repenser la réforme, réformer la pensée, Edgar Morin argues that man originates from living and physical nature and, at the same time, distinguishes himself from it and emerges through culture, thought, and consciousness. Morin devoted much of his work to a reform of thought, to an integral education that overcomes the separation of disciplines. He argues that culture is split into two blocks. On the one hand, humanistic culture. On the other hand, scientific culture. On the one hand, the development of global and all-embracing thinking. On the other, analytical and sectoral thinking. This separation fails to grasp what is woven together, the complexus. I believe that an audio-based didactics of listening separates and isolates and risks not letting people understand and feel the complexity of music making, the joy that comes from physical movement and intellectual thinking. I will conclude with one last example, not from the young people's concerts, but from a more recent performance. Beethoven's Third Concerto with Christian Zimmermann at the piano and Bernstein conducting the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra in 1989. The musical genre of the concerto can be described in terms of a confrontation, sometimes conciliatory, sometimes more dramatic, between the parts in which the solo, in this case the piano, prevails and the parts assigned exclusively to the orchestra. I show you the transition between the last bars of the solo and the return of the orchestra. I believe that Bernstein's expression at the moment when the orchestra explodes gives account for another title which the young people's concerts have gone down in history, namely The Joy of Music. Thank you very much. Bye bye.